That's what I was waiting for. Okay. So hopefully you've had a little time to go through some of the agenda. There was some information in there that we thought would be handy for you to be able to look at before we actually dove into it at the meeting today. As always, we'll start off by doing the monthly financial update. The October financial reports have been posted online. I don't have any concerns about how anything is trending. The budget amendment will hopefully get passed at the next council meeting, and then if it does, those will be incorporated into the November financial statements. Does anybody have any questions after reviewing those? All right. Okay. I can tell it's before Thanksgiving. Everybody's ready to be done, right? The mid-biennium budget modification will be presented at the next council meeting for its second reading. Council did not make any changes, so the documents will be the exact same that were in the last agenda. The good news is we're with all the changes incorporated between all the council updates and the staff requests, the general fund's still sitting at about $2.1 million, which does include the $500,000 for erosion repairs, as well as the $60,000 for the lobbyist. So none of those documents will change, and hopefully we can get that approved on Monday. Any questions about that? All right. This B&O tax code update came upon me rather quickly. I literally read it in an AWC newsletter that came out on November 9th. Basically, it's just a requirement. The language that we're adding is like a couple sentences that basically talks about a state exemption for B&O tax, but it doesn't affect any city stuff. We're just required to get it in our city code to meet the state requirements. All of the information has been included in this packet, and it will be in the agenda. I actually put the AWC newsletter in there to kind of explain it, what the current code looks like, what it will look like after the changes have been made. Unfortunately, I'm asking to get this approved on the first reading because it's supposed to be in effect January 1st, and our ordinance doesn't go into effect until 30 days after it's published. So for us to be in compliance with the state requirement, it needs to be approved at the next council meeting. Luckily, it's only a couple sentences. It's required. We don't really have any choice. So any questions on any of that? All right, you guys are easy. Okay. Golf course. I know that Mayor and Councilmember Hartman met with the golf course last week, and I asked them to give an update on where we're at. We also received some updated financial statements for October that we'll talk about. So with that, I'll turn it over to the mayor and Rich.
Well, basically this was we had a meeting to have discussion about us moving forward into next year, because we'll have kind of completed our inaugural run, so we actually have some hard numbers. I requested Troon to go ahead and start putting together projections for next year, so that we have a better understanding of how things are going, since most of the numbers we're working off of was their projections that we did initially. Now we've got some really real numbers that we can look at it. We had the discussion about making a change in what we're charging, and it's not a significant change, but Kurt, when he was running it, was not including sales tax into the cost of rounds and things like that. He was paying it, but he was just absorbing it, so it would be an even number. So like most of us, when we go shopping, we'll see $12, and then we know that there is a sales tax charge that goes along with it. Our golf course has not been doing that, and recommendation was for us to go ahead and start charging sales tax with it. So so you may be hearing some people talking about the increase, but it's basically just recovering what sales tax costs are. Also had the conversation that we are now going into the slow part of the season, which means that the city will start writing checks to Troon to make sure that we have the reserve fund with Troon there. We made the decision earlier on to not have Troon hold on to any of the money, that as soon as we hit that threshold, that it would be turned over to the city. So Angie, what was the first check that we wrote?
So we've had 3 deposits from them since May. So up until the October financials came out, they were actually depositing money into our account, because there was a profit. October's financial statements were the first, time we've had to actually pay them back. So we still have a year-to-date profit of about $68,000, that is sitting in our golf course fund. So it's to be expected with things slowing down. Obviously, the weather, is just that time of the year. So we're watching it. Hopefully it'll pick back up in the spring. But we kind of expected this to happen.
Right. And again, that during the time that Kurt had it, we really didn't receive any money back into the city with it. So we're ahead of what we originally projected for. But again, we're in that downtime of the year that they have worked on reducing their labor cost, but you still need to maintain it. So, and then the final thing that we kind of had two things that we and I'll leave it up to the council and the new mayor to make the decision with whatever they wanted to do, is the profit and loss statements that are given to us do not have all the details that a typical business would have. Not that they're missing anything. They're more structured towards how the city does for accounting. And so the question is whether or not we want to have more details on what the statements are on there. And of course that could be done, but as one of the things that is a little bit different than private businesses and the municipal is just how that we do accounting. You know, like for instance, that we would set up accruals for annual things that you get a one-time hit that you pay the bill, but you start putting money aside until it comes up to that. The city pretty much pays as we go. So we're on a cash basis. We do not do the city does not do any capitalization. So everything is paid again so there's a difference between the two operating, and it's going to be up to the council and the mayor of what is that reporting there. So they seem to be a little bit understanding that we may want to have more details, but again, what that's going to be, that we can work through that. And then the final thing is that there's the city in the past has really had kind of a policy that when we purchase equipment, that we pay cash for it. You know, that we don't take any loans, we don't do leasing and items like that. In the golf course side of doing it, that they do most of their equipment purchases by leasing, and they get very low interest rate, and that would probably be something that we would want to take a look at leveraging, and that's how Troon does it, but that might be a little bit different than what we have done as a city. So that's just no real discussion of the direction that we're going, but that's just something that that we'll want to look forward in the future. So Rich, you have anything you want to add?
No, you hit the nail on the head there. It's just going to be a matter of how much detail the council is going to want to see. You know, basically we're micromanaging the Troon people a little bit, and once the decision is actually made, we'll just look at financial statements from here on out. That'll be the same way every month. And John, I agree with you about the leasing versus purchasing. It's a tough one. I like the idea of when it's time for for us through Troon to lease these different pieces of equipment in the future that might be necessary. Because then we really see how the golf course is performing annually. When we just go out and write a check for blank dollars, you know, because again, the way the city does accounting, they don't have a depreciation set up on a financial statement every month for us to see the effect of us just spending all that cash. And, you know, looks like the golf course is doing way better than it is because they never quote have to pay anything back because that's the way cities are. So I like having things potentially leased in the future because then we'll have a really accurate picture of what this golf course is doing for us.
Angie, you have anything that you want to add?
No, I think you guys have covered it. They did want to mention with the October financial statements as well that they're still about $17,000 ahead of where they thought they'd be budget wise. So there is a good note in there, even though we had to pay money back this month. So yeah, we'll just continue to meet with them, get the updates to the financials that we need, talk about whether we should be accruing some of these one-time items that they're paying. So it's just kind of, we're learning it as we go.
And they expensed an annual insurance premium that in other businesses is accrued over 12 months. So we took a $14,000 hit in this last financial statement that, you know, makes it look worse than technically it was.
Yeah, can I ask, just tell us again, Angie, I think I missed, what was the check amount that we paid?
It's about $20,000.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And presumably, when you're talking leasing stuff, the city doesn't amortize depreciation, is that right? Is that what the big difference is like a piece of machinery costs $10,000 and it's amortized over the life of the machine in normal, or in regular business, but that's the difference that you're trying to capture?
Yep, we don't accrue anything. So when we pay a bill, it hits our checkbook and we're done with it. So we don't essentially, divide that out over 7 years for certain things like you do with an accrual basis of accounting. My feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, is that the golf course it's a private business, so they can do their books, they do it on an accrual basis. So they can basically do what we need them to do as far as that goes, using the insurance for an example, instead of booking it all in 1 month, booking that out over 12 months. They have the option to do that, I believe, because they're private. As to where the city, we have to follow the state requirements, and it's like a checkbook. When we pay a bill, it hits our checkbook essentially. So, but these are the discussions we need to have going forward. They've been very accommodating, and because this is new for them as well, they don't have any other golf courses that they do this style of accounting for. So it's kind of everybody's learning at the same time, and it's just, every month we'll get something better and better. So it's just a matter of communicating with them on our needs, and figuring that out as we go along.
Maybe adding a couple of footnotes to whatever ends up being posted to the city pages would be helpful for people who pop in and look at our financial statements and wonder, what is that difference? Why is it 14,000 versus, what would that be, $1,000 a month? Maybe a footnote or two would help people understand that better.
Yeah, to show the one-time lump payments.
Right.
Yeah.
That particular entry is very easy to pick up, but you're right. There could be some that are very confusing.
Right. I just, the more we can explain why we're booking things differently, I think the better transparency works for the city.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right, any more questions on golf course? Nope, okay. Financial policy update. I'm gonna turn this one over to Catherine.
Thanks. So you guys will remember a month or a little more ago, Allison and Lisa and I asked council to allow us to create an ad hoc committee to revisit our 3 guidelines documents. The first one being the financial policy. So what we did was meet several times, actually, go over the original resolution, which is number 765 that was written in 2017, to look at where we are with regards to what sort of guidelines the council at that time set forward. And one of the big issues I had with it was trying to figure out how to measure some of the things they wanted to do. And then I did mention at the time of our meeting that I felt we needed to revisit what our ending balance would be, because in the document, it said it was 1.5 million. And just before COVID, we said, let's bring it to 2 million, never memorialize that. And then during COVID, we said, let's bring it to 2.5 million and never memorialize that. So we were out of compliance with our document. And Angie and John were kind enough to meet with me after we looked at the document and said, well, where are we on this, that, and the other thing? And we took the 2 documents and, with Angie's advice, separated them into 2 major sections. Financial best practices, which were things like providing clear guidelines that were not measurable, and measurable goals that we could say, yes, we've made that, yes, we're maintaining that. So nothing there were only 2 places where we actually struck goals from the 2017 document. And the goals we struck were under long-term planning. The first one was conducting a status review of the capital facilities work plan yearly, or excuse me, it said biennially, because at the time we never had a facilities plan. We have one now. The second one we struck was developing a new plan for inventorying and tagging equipment by 2019 that includes small and attractive equipment and tools. And then the third one we struck is reviewing insurance adequacy yearly on all capital assets. And the reason why we struck them is because, as Angie pointed out, we have to do that either through the audits or they're just out of date. So we took the documents, we separated best practices, and I got to thank Angie because she helped us through this whole process. We separated best practices from those measurable things that we can look at and tick off. So what you will see on Monday is a separation between the best practices and financial policies. We did raise the reserve goal to $2 million from 1.5. We added to maintain our enterprise fund ending balances at least 10% of adopted operating expenditures. We're under B, Sarah, or whoever's moving the thing. And so basically they're pretty much the same. They're just reorganized into something that's more measurable in the end part of it. So Angie, do you want to add anything to that? You did a lot of the work and provided us with a great amount of advice with trying to make this make sense.
I think that when I walked into the meeting with you, we immediately had the same reaction because I went into kind of audit mode of the last policy. And as I was going through it point by point to see if we were meeting the goals and complying with the policy, I was like, well, most of the items are subjective. Like if we put 5 people in a room, 3 will say yes, 2 will say no. So that's what we tried to move up into a best practice section, because technically a policy that sets actual policies should be measurable, quantifiable. And there were some things in the policy that clearly you're able to measure them, like the fund balance, or how we want to have at least 10% of operating expenditures in the enterprise fund balances. So like Catherine said, it was just a lot of cleaning it up, making sure that we can actually comply with the measurable stuff and take the subjective stuff and put it into, yeah, would be great if we can do it, but we can't really measure it. So that was the big thing. The other big thing, like she mentioned, was the general fund ending balance, which I think is probably what council is going to want to talk about the most, because it's kind of been a moving target based on people's comfort level and just based on how the city is going. I mean, during COVID, we ratcheted it up. Now that we're out of COVID, do we want to bring it down? So, her and I were thinking 2 million was kind of the sweet spot for it, but obviously council has to make that decision in the end about where that should be. And I just want to say that a lot of these, the policy items, like the stuff with percentages on them, those are super helpful to us during the budget process when we meet with the department heads and say, they want all these things. Well, if you want all these things, we're not going to be in our policy because we're not going to have enough in the ending balance per the financial policy. So a lot of those things are important for us to keep in there as far as the budget goes, because this is what we build our budget on, essentially. So I thought we ended in a good place. Obviously, it's a council policy. You'll have to go through that at a council meeting and revise what's in there or, do what you're going to do with it. But it's a good starting point, I think, for the discussion. And I appreciate the committee's work on it. It needed to be done. It's been a number of years and it was very outdated. So I just appreciate their work and look forward to bringing it to council.
And I just want to add a couple of the things that we talked about. I asked the question why this was a resolution rather than just guidelines, and why we shouldn't collapse the 3 guidelines documents into one. And what I learned was that when we have an audit, the auditor, their first step is to, Angie said, to pull this document and say, are you complying with your goals? And I think it was tough for them to determine which of the goals we were complying with, because most of them were not measurable. For example, one of them was providing clear guidelines for current and future elected officials. Well, yeah, but how do you measure that? And the second thing is we put in a long-term planning was to start all the budgeting and add to the budgeting calendar, revisiting the capital facilities plan now that we will have one prior to the beginning of the budget cycle. So right in that calendar document that starts in kind of like June, the first thing that the financial department would do is to look at that capital facilities plan and say, what do we want to pull from that plan to put into our budget? So that's sort of begins that planning process that we haven't had before, partly because we haven't had a financial facilities plan. And I'll throw it to you guys in just a minute after I say thank you to Rich Hartman, because you're the one who really pushed that capital facilities plan during our last budget cycle. And I think it will really drive what council decisions look like going forward. So questions, I do hope we can pass these requests at the next meeting so we can get them cleaned up and in the documentation for the incoming council. Now,
I've got-
Rich,
So you expose something I didn't ever think about, which is the auditor looks at a policy like this or a resolution like this too.
I didn't realize it either.
So, Catherine, what kind of a corner are we hypothetically potentially putting ourselves in by raising the suggested number of the ending fund balance to 2 million? What if we want to fund more into the capital facilities area, and it brings our number down to 1.8 million? And even though we actually have the money, can we then get a bad audit because of the technicality?
Well, I'll give you my viewpoint and then throw it to Angie because she's gonna know about the audit pieces. We have maintained, I don't remember a time that I've been on council for 5 years when we've really even been at the $2 million. We've consistently been more than $2 million ending balance. Maybe when I first started, we were 1.5, but I don't think it's an issue. And it certainly is probably lower than some people are going to want to put in. I know Eric mentioned we should have 8 million. Angie and I discussed that. It's like, now that's like a third of our total budget, and nobody does a third of their total budget. We also computed what would be 3 months operating, and it'd be right around 2.2 million. Is that right, Angie? And I'll throw it to you. What about the audit piece of that?
So yes, if we set it at 2 million and we budget for 1.8, the auditors will take exception to that. On the flip side, the reason for the policy is to kind of keep council wrangled in as far as spending goes and where they want that target to be. When we go out for bonds, they also look at this policy and they will make sure that we have some kind of ending fund balance target in there as well. So there's a couple of reasons for doing it, but yes, whatever's in the policy does get audited, and if we're not in compliance with it, then they'll write us up for it. But on that note, council can change the policy at any time as well. So if there's an issue with, we want to do something different, we would just bring it back to council and see if that was the consensus and just adjust the policy.
Other than the auditors, shame on you for being 100,000 under your plan. Are there any teeth? Because I remember discussion in the past about, I've written down a bunch of words, it's a goal, it's a guide, it's a recommendation, or is it a policy? Or, then of course you got the strong word ordinance, best practice. What's the right word for this? I mean, is it, and are there teeth in any regard?
No, the auditors will just say you're not in compliance with your own city policy, and they'll recommend that we get in compliance.
So literally policy is the correct word for this. And if we choose not to follow our own policy, then whatever.
Yep.
Richard.
So I just want to express my appreciation, Rich and Catherine, for your deeper understanding of this type of issue. And this dialogue has dramatically improved my understanding. Thank you both.
One of the things I think you'll notice is that starting on page 3 of this document, there's 2 policies for debt and just 4 policies for reserves. The previous document was just kind of all over the place, But like I said, and Angie and I both honed in on, probably because we're both analytical, I can't figure out how to measure this on a lot of those resolution number 765. It's like, well, I don't know. What is this? Whenever feasible, pay off debt early, but avoid excessive depletion of reserves. It's like, I can't measure that.
Yeah.
The other thing I did that I wanted, it just made me think about, I changed that term after talking to Angie and John. I changed the term reserves to ending balance because I think that's been confusing for a lot of people. Your reserves are your ending balance, but sometimes people think there's some other pot of money underneath that's a reserve that you don't touch because it's in, you know, it's in some kind of file cabinet somewhere. It's simply ending balance. So I said, let's take it out. Let's make it more clear. Don't confuse me anymore, basically, was sort of the reason why I changed the term from.
Let me ask you a question with that. You know, when I think about the city and all of the cash we have everywhere, you've got you've got the EMS utility. That's a big old pot of money, right? We have capital improvement, or we have equipment funds. We have money everywhere. So Catherine, how does that work into what you just said? I realize that, you know, we're not supposed to spend money that we've accumulated for equipment, but in an emergency, we actually have cash everywhere in all these different accounts.
We do, and some of those, we had the discussion at the last meeting, some of those are harder to access than others. So our contingency fund is harder to access than the general fund, which is why we ended up putting the $500,000 for erosion mitigation into the general fund on its in a separate line, because we don't have to go through that declaring an emergency to access it. With regards to like the EMS fund, we said under reserves enterprise funds, which is EMS, water, sewer, and stormwater, ending fund balances need to be 10% of adopted operating expenses. So as long as we stay under 10%, stay 10% or more, then we're at the goals that we want. So most of our funding is actually assigned. The ending fund balance, I think, Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, but the ending fund balances are really the places where that funding is not assigned. Is that right?
Yeah, so basically it's the money that's not budgeted to be spent. So if we were to dive into any of those ending fund balances, it means most likely we're overspent and we would have to go to council and ask for budget amendments to dive into those reserves or ending fund balances. So yeah, it's the unallocated, you know, we start with a beginning balance, we get this much revenue, we have this much in expense, and the rest is ending fund balance, and it sits there until we budget to use it.
And I think then, Rich, to just sort of close the loop, when you all get into the budgeting time or into budget amendments, you're going to look at whatever the mayor and the department heads present to you in their list of, I want this, and you're going to say, the first thing you're going to do probably is say, well, if you get everything you ask for, what's our ending balance going to be? And if it drops below that $2 million recommended reserve goal, then you're going to say, no, start cutting, start lining things up, just like you do really for your business. Is, you know, we're not spending any more than we need to maintain this amount.
And
So
that's
I've got a couple questions and based on that. So Angie, let's say we're December of 24 and let's pick a department. Let's pick on police, and they've got $70,000 left in their in their unspent money, let's just call it.
Mhm.
What's been the guide for you in the 70 grand that's in that unspent fund from the police department's budget? What do you do with that money? Do you just put it back in the general fund, or do you allow them to keep that and not slap them on the wrist? What do you do?
So any unspent funds, just stay in the ending fund balance. So essentially the 70,000 would just roll into the ending fund balance and make it higher than we expected it to end.
For
So they
that
don't-
specific department?
Yes, so essentially they don't roll, we don't roll over budgets, we have to re-budget them. So in the policy, there's actually a statement in there that any unencumbered expenses or whatever the language is, just stay in the fund balance. And then it's use it or lose it essentially for the department. So they have to ask for it again next budget cycle if they don't use it. It doesn't.
Okay, so if
just
I'm gonna
roll
make
over.
up a terrible number, if their budget was $1 million and they had 70 grand left over, and that was the 2-year budget, the next 2 years, 25, 26, they're gonna ask for another $1 million hypothetically.
Mhm.
You don't give them that 70 grand, so they're not just automatically getting their 1,070,000. They're back to whatever they asked for, $1 million.
Whatever they ask for, exactly.
What has been your experience over all these years with department heads making sure they spend everything really quick at the end of their 2-year cycle?
They don't do that. If you look at it, most of them are actually underspent. So they don't just go at the end of the year and start spending money. They're very conservative and most of them, there's a couple in there, like police is kind of a terrible example because of the overtime. There's not
Right,
really
right.
any control over the overtime, but the department heads are really cognizant of that and they just don't go on a spending spree at the end of the budget. They spend what they need.
And my experience has been basically, as I've observed, there'll be leftover. We had the discussion when I first got on council. The RCW basically says you use it or you lose it. It has to be reassigned. The section you were referring to is under best practices reserves #1, Angie. At each fiscal year end, the remaining dollars left in each fund that are undesignated and unencumbered constitute available reserves to the city. So that's a best practice. There's no way of measuring the 70,000 or whatever, but it rolls back into the budget and has to be reallocated.
Mhm.
So
for
hypothetically, it goes into the general fund.
Yes.
Yeah, well, except for enterprise funds.
Yeah, it just, the police is part of the
right,
general fund, but like water would just stay in water.
Right.
Yeah.
So since you folks were talking about policies, and let me ask this again, Angie, on any one day, you've got millions and millions of dollars everywhere.
Uh-huh.
How have you decided to use that money? If you know, like she said, if you've got 3 months of bills, if you're going through $700,000 a month, and let's just say it's a perfect world and you're bringing in $700,000 a month in revenues, so you're
Mhm.
always going, okay, how much of all that extra money are you putting with the state so we're getting that high interest rate rather than just leaving it in a checking account? How do you decide how much money you send away?
We only keep about 2 million in our general checking account. That's kind of what we need cash flow wise to keep the bills paid.
Okay.
All of the rest of it is in the state pool earning interest. So we don't, out of all of the money we have, the very small portion of it is actually in a bank account that we use for operational stuff. It's sitting in the pool. And we have some, like coming up on December 1st, we have our huge debt payments coming up for the convention center, the fire department. So we will have to move money from the pool into the general checking account to cover that.
Yeah.
But we don't, it's usually around 2 million is what we need to operate without, breaking the bank account.
So we've been making the state's rate now is pretty high, isn't it?
Yes, it's very high. So
Like
yes.
over 5, I think.
Yeah. So no, it's definitely, we keep it there as long as we can and then move it when we need to.
Richard, I saw you put your hand up.
I was just gonna make an FYI comment. In the Army, it was also use it or lose it. And what always happened at the end of the budget cycle, if there was excess, we spent it crazy. 3 pool tables. Well, who needs 3 pool tables? Happy that our department heads don't do that. Thank you.
Yeah, they don't.
They're pretty conscientious about it, I think.
Very.
I won't say that I have retired friends in government that used to spend like crazy.
It is more common at the state because they really will reallocate your budget based on
Yeah.
how you spend it the last time. And I think it's different at the municipal level.
Yeah.
It was not uncommon at the school districts too, which is a state agency. We watched our budget very closely, and if we needed a computer or something and we had a little bit extra, we'd buy that computer. We didn't waste it on frivolous stuff, but it literally went back into a different department if we didn't use
Yes.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
So what my hope is that you two will support this. You'll be familiar with it. And I know Angie said, I asked Angie, are you good with 2 million? And Angie said, yes, I think that's the sweet spot. And I hope you two will read this and agree, and we can get this into effect before the end of the year, so that the new council has a new policy and can go forward without some of that at lack of clarity that we've had since 2017.
No, this is a good first step because I love hearing the fact that you said 2.1 was about 3 months of expenses on average. 3 to 6 months is really great to have. So I'm glad we're at that first step at least.
Yeah.
All right. My last item is just giving you an update on ClearGov. We're still progressing on the ClearGov as our new budget module. We are still hoping to have that online in January. We actually have a meeting scheduled with them next week to look at, they have all of our mapping done, and it's our first sneak peek at what it's going to look like. So we're excited for that. So still progressing, moving forward with it. And again, just hoping to get it online in January.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
This won't be something that I have sway over, but I would highly recommend you do once it's going, do a demonstration at a council meeting. So again, in the spirit of transparency,
Yep.
people can see how they can interact with that system so that they feel more comfortable with all of those pieces that they've been, so confused about.
Yep.
Over as long as I've been hanging out.
Yeah, for sure. They walked us through like another cities. It's awesome. So yeah, and it's easy. You just get on there and you start clicking on things or hovering above things, and it'll break out all the details. So yeah, definitely. Once we're up to speed on it, it would be a good opportunity to do that.
Even if it were going into a different city, like I think you said Stanwood is
Stanwood.
on the system, even if the demonstration were of a different city, to see how the public can interact, I think would be helpful if there's glitches.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, Scott, you get the next really complicated item. Have fun with it. The judicial contracts.
Richard, did you have a question before I move on?
So if I wanted to go look at Stanwood, do I just go to stanwood.gov or whatever their URL and it'll be apparent?
Yep, it's called their digital budget book. That's what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so judicial contracts. Substantively, this is pretty simple, but procedurally, it's a little complicated. So let me just try to walk you through it best I can. Council wanted us, obviously, to not do automatic extensions anymore and to send these bids back out to see what we got. And on September 6th, we did just that. But I'll put in a little caveat in here. So we sent out the prosecutor and the defense attorney, but not the judge. And the judge is in a different category because under the RCW that we currently operate under for the court, which is 350-040, when we sign the judge, we sign them to a 4-year term. And this would put him through this would be his 3rd year. So this one is an extension. The other two, we put them out to bid. We received nothing back. There was a little bit of panic where we actually had to like start calling people. And they kind of came up with an agreement both with the city and with themselves that Judge Sage only wants to do this 1 more year and he's done. Bitar, who is our public defender, only wants to do this 1 more year and then he's retiring. And so in order to keep that on track, we also asked Hagan, our prosecutor, would you be willing to do a 1-year contract? And then we put these all back out very early next year or somewhere in between in 2024 for 6 months out. And then we will know if the court will remain in the city of Ocean Shores, depending on what we get back, or if we will have to move it. But right now we've received nothing back. So we're asking for 1 extension on the judge's contract for a full year and a new contract for both our prosecutor and defense attorney. The amount budgeted is less than, and that's probably why it's on here, obviously, is less than what we have. So it's going to be about $20,000 more for a year to keep all 3 different positions. But with basically what we're asking council to do, and I'll bring Kim Wild to speak to the value of the court and why it's really important to keep it in Ocean Shores, is to let this court operate for 1 more year until the end of 2024. We will somewhere in June put out RFQs and hopefully have a court here in Ocean Shores, but that can't be guaranteed. But we can keep this together for 1 more year. And with that, I guess I'll turn it over to see if you have any questions. Go ahead, Rich. And then Richard.
I'm confused. You said that the Judge Sage had 2 more years.
He does, but he doesn't want to do it. He voluntarily wants to retire at the end of so legally he has 2 years. We couldn't remove him, but he is determined to retire at the end of this year.
Okay.
And
So
Bitar
by doing a 1-year contract, it then cancels the 2 years left on his term.
Yes. Now we had that question. What if he changes his mind somewhere in between? And that will be for the lawyers, but he doesn't. He says he's going to retire at the end of next year.
All right.
Richard?
I'm curious, if we lose the court here in Shores, where would people have to travel to attend court?
Montesano.
Okay, a burden.
It's a huge burden, and not just, and I'll let Kim speak more to that. It's not just a burden for the people, the residents of Ocean Shores. It's a burden for our police department that would have to go up there anytime they need to testify. We'd be putting our police department in the same situation that we put our fire department in currently when they have to go to Aberdeen and Hoquiam with every transport. So it's taking them out of the city for long periods of time. It's not convenient. We'd rather keep the court here, but we can't guarantee it after this year. Judge Sage has been doing this for 20 years. I think Bitar has been doing it here for 31 years. But when we put it out, just no one had the qualifications. No one wanted to make the expense. They've been running this way for quite some time. And so I want to give, obviously, Kim and the Ocean Shores Municipal Court as best a chance as possible to keep it here, which is why we're going to put it out very, very early. But it's not a guarantee.
Sorry.
I have a question. I know we do court once a month. Any idea on average, how many cases there are per court date?
I can look it up, but I know it's like, for example, last year, Bitar actually went over. We had to do some kind of waiver because he went over the threshold for indigent defense because they had so many. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd be making it up, but I'd have to go back and look it up. But I know that's happened. The court is busy. I mean, I know it's very busy, but and that's exactly why I'm bringing Kim to council, because she can probably answer that off the top of her head.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful as people are looking at what your deliberations are, to tell council and the public how many cases per meeting there are,
Right.
because that's going to tell us how many people have to drive out of town to appear in court.
We do have the dockets posted online also.
Yeah.
So anybody could go under municipal court, under departments, and see the dockets. for this year.
And that's new, isn't it, Sarah? I don't remember. I remember trying to find a docket a couple years ago and there was nothing.
Correct. We had tried to get it to be posted, and we had some conflict with the previous court clerk, and this court clerk was like, why aren't we doing this? And I asked the same question. So I think we started this in about April of this year. We
Okay.
post, and then yeah, we have plans for 2024 also.
That's good to know.
Yeah, Jennifer, our previous court clerk, interpreted this slightly differently, but yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Rich.
So Catherine answered my question. It's one time a month. I'm going to assume that we don't need officers there for every single exchange. They're not there for as witnesses every single time. When we have a prisoner, hypothetically, someone in custody, where are they housed? The courthouse?
Hoquiam. Well, so Hoquiam is our number one destination for where we leave them. We can only keep them at Ocean Shores. I can't remember if it's 2 or 4 hours.
Right. So
At the
we're
local
still
jail.
sending a police officer. all
Yeah,
the
every
way
time we do
to
that, we do. Yes, in fact,
Hoquiam.
when we go up to Forks, we have to do the same thing. And I
Right.
know, like, even our chief of police has had to escort.
So if we want to
people
really
to
talk
Forks.
about the use of our police officers, if we're sending them to court or to the jail in either Hoquiam and bringing them back to Ocean Shores, or sending them to Montesano, bringing them back to Ocean Shores, I mean, it might not be as aggressive as you think, especially if it's only one day a month.
Something to think about. Or the other thing is, it would be wise, I'm not here to tell people how to manage what they do, but I surely would not want to see one police officer going to get a potentially violent person. I would want to see 2 people going up to Forks or wherever to bring back somebody who's going to appear in our court. I wouldn't want to see somebody by themselves escorting a prisoner. Just me.
And what would preclude time sharing with Hoquiam or Aberdeen courts? Why is Montesano the only destination for a court? Teach me that.
This is a discussion we've never had with Hoquiam and Aberdeen to date. And again, that would probably be somewhat of a Kim question. I just know that the only people we've talked about is having the county, if we didn't do it ourselves. I don't know if we've ever looked at the idea of time sharing. I think we did I had one conversation with Brian Shea on that matter, but that was a long time ago and I can't remember what the outcome of it was. Yeah, I mean, basically, I think we look at this as our model for a year. That's what we're going to ask. And then after that, I think we're open to pretty much anything that would work.
Appreciate you saying we'll give it a 6 month, 6 months
Yeah.
before we'll start. We should dive into it now to know our options so that we're not last minute.
Right. Well, last minute this time will be very different because this next time, I mean, we won't have the judge and we won't have our defense attorney
Sure.
as they're both retiring. So there's going to have to be a switch if we can't find something.
Correct.
Richard?
I keep debating whether to ask this question. I've decided I'm going to. If you don't get a response to the RFQ, is there a system in place that you and the mayor can incentivize by suggesting a higher court cost, a higher salary? Are we just stuck if we don't get any responses?
Well, here's the thing. I think that because for a long time they have kept their costs somewhat down just because they've been here a long time. And I think a lot of people, I won't say a lot, several people probably didn't bid because they thought that the current people that are doing this are going to come in under. If they're not bidding on this, I have no idea if we would get people. There are a number of qualifications to do this job that make it cumbersome for not just any attorney can do it. And again, Kim can kind of speak more to that than I can, but we may get bids, but they may come in at just higher than what we've been paying.
And
If we
let's
put it
be
back.
honest, it's Grays Harbor. If I'm an attorney, I know everyone. And if I
Yep.
already know that let's pick on Tiger Hagan as our defense attorney. I'm not going to bid against Tiger. I'm not going to bother. So-
That's being honest is a lot of
Yeah.
probably why we didn't receive any RFQs back.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Scott, do you have anything else to add for city
No,
administration?
I will at the next one because we're going to talk about some of the ARPA issues that related to the ditch, but I don't have the numbers here in front of me yet. So
Okay. I will turn it over to the mayor. Do you have any reports for us? Oh, you're muted.
No, I think we covered off a lot. I mean, the work that the ad hoc committee's done on the different financial is going to be very worthwhile conversation with the council as far as moving forward. You know, that I think that I think everything we're really coming up to the end of the year, you know, and so I think a lot of the stuff is looking at whatever projects want to go forward. And of course, the big question is going to be is when we get the report back on the conditions of our facilities, and then having the council deciding what the priorities and how to attack it. Because I know in capital plans that I've dealt with every place else, the number is going to be outstanding, and there's just no way that we're ever going to be able to do it. But again, it gives you a guideline of where to go to get there. And I'm hoping that that you will follow up with the computer part of it, that you can track all the expenditures that are going in, so you can get to, hopefully that they'll give you a number that tells you how the condition of your facility is, and the hope is to keep it getting better than getting worse. But that's only as good as the data that you're feeding into the computer as you do the project. But looking forward to seeing how that turns out, and as well as the other when the budgeting software gets up to speed, especially the transparency part. I think that will help everybody in the city have a better understanding real time of what the data is going to be. So looking forward to what you guys are going to be doing in the future. And that's all I got.
All right. Well, thank you all. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Yep.
All right,
Everything's
bye.